Halo Infinite is finally in the hands of the general public, and while I write this before that official launch, hopefully the fanbase is happy with what they've experienced, overall at least. Prior to that launch, however, 343 gave fans one final treat to sink their teeth into, an audio drama titled Memory Agent. Following an Oni agent who suffers from a unique type of short-term memory loss, think Memento to a degree, the series dives into stories of the Master Chief's heroism, diving once more into the UNSC archives. Though fairly straightforward as far as a Halo audio drama goes, this is no Hunt the Truth or Isle of Bees in scope, it gets fans a look at what hope can mean for civilians and UNSC personnel, while revisiting classic moments from the Chief's adventures from new perspectives. So let's dive in and analyze this latest Halo audio series. And yes, this is a full dive, so don't proceed unless you're ready for spoilers. If you haven't listened to the series yet, I've left a link to it in the description box below. For everyone else, let's begin. The series opens introducing us to our currently unnamed Oni agent awakening from cryosleep, unable to remember much. She's greeted by Technical Officer Mateus, informed that she's currently on the UNSC Down, Out, and Go, and that a classified briefing is ready for her. Though still confused, she's brought to her briefing and left alone as she discovers that she has gone full Memento, suffering from anterograde amnesia, meaning her brain can't store short-term memories. Appropriately, the lieutenant is briefed by a hologram of herself, informing her of her condition and that she can retain information for 7 hours at a time, more or less. As we learn, however, whatever information she does learn during that 7 hours is photographically memorized for that period. It isn't clear if this is a natural ability that Oni enhanced or if Oni gave her a photographic memory. The series simply says,
Lieutenant, your photographic retention within your daily 7-hour cycle has been augmented and drilled with the loci method.
The what?
Otherwise known as a memory palace for enhanced recall.
Anyway, after her briefing is complete and the lieutenant is introduced to her dumb AI companion, Oliver, she's given a note with the information she's transporting and memorizes it before destroying it. As the first episode ends, the lieutenant asks about whom she'll be delivering the intel to, which turns out to be the Master Chief himself. Not knowing who the Master Chief is, her inquiry serves as a framing device for the rest of the episodes, with the lieutenant listening to accounts of the Chief's heroism while trying to complete her mission. Incidentally, these stories are all pulled from the UNSC archives, seemingly the same archive that served as a framing device for the UNSC Archives ad series. I personally like to imagine now that those commercials were this lieutenant looking up information on the Chief during past missions. The first story the lieutenant listens to comes from a hydrological scientist named Faith Avdi via the UNESCO New Mombasa Heritage Sites Reflections Project. UNESCO, incidentally, is a real-life organization, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which promotes education, science, the arts, and culture. Faith worked for Mombasa Water and Power, and was present when the city was invaded on October 20th, 2552. As she and her co-workers try to evacuate the city, they come across a scarab, the same scarab the Chief destroys in Halo 2, followed by the Chief himself soon after. After being saved, Faith discovers a message from work, saying that the seawalls had been breached and that someone needed to open a spillway before New Mombasa was flooded. Faith rushes back to work and, seeing the Chief and UNSC fighting the scarab near the canal, opens the spillway into the train tunnels, freeing the canal to act as a trap for the scarab. So, Faith created the opening for the Chief to destroy the scarab, and created the flooded tunnels Alpha 9 had to deal with in Halo 3 ODST. And she did all of that because of a simple nod from the Master Chief after he saved her life. Moving over to Episode 3, the Lieutenant pulls up testimony from Captain Carol Raleigh, who fans will know better as none other than Foehammer, Echo 419. The audio testimony was recorded just after the Captain had dropped off the Chief in Cortana at the start of the level Assault on the Control Room, and expands a little on the relationships between the Chief and Foehammer. As we learn, when Foehammer was first asked to take the Chief in Cortana through the tunnels and pathways beneath Halo's surface, she wasn't too keen on the idea. As it turns out, the Chief was able to change her mind, suggesting Foehammer might not be up to the task. Determined to prove the Spartan wrong, well, we know what happened after that. With as much of an impact as Foehammer left on fans, it's great to hear her return, and voiced once more by Dr. Tanya Pettiford-Waits, the same woman who played Foehammer back in 2001. In Episode 4, having discovered the fate of Captain Raleigh, the Lieutenant requests a story from someone who fought alongside the Chief and lived, bringing up the testimony of the man, the myth, the legend, the Flood Hunter himself, Private First Class Chips Dubbo. Of all the characters that could have appeared, I would never have expected Chip's Dubbo. For those who may not know, Chip's Dubbo was a Marine that could be encountered in the Bungie Halo titles. Known for his iconic Aussie accent, Chips is a fan-favorite gag character, and here he relates a tale of fighting alongside the Chief during the Flood invasion of Voy. Chips is also voiced by his original voice actor, Australian actor Andrew McCaig. It's a great story, better heard than related by some guy on YouTube, but Chips does mention that he knows the truth about the Master Chief, that John has no family beyond his fellow Spartans, his loyal blues, as Chips says. Curious about what the Flood Hunter could mean, the Lieutenant has Oliver pull up the earliest records on the Chief in the archives. This brings up several classified files along with Dr. Halsey's name and Eridanos II, the Chief's homeworld. Eventually though, Oliver finds the earliest file that the Lieutenant also has clearance for, a testimony from Senior Chief Petty Officer Franklin Mendez. Mendez relates a few details about John's early days in Spartan training, how he was a bit of a prick and had to learn to work with his teammates. Then he gets to a more pivotal event in John's life. When the Spartan 2s were but 8 years old, they were sent into the wilderness of Reach and ordered to find their way back home via an evac Pelican. The Spartans were successful, but ended up incapacitating several UNSC Marines in the process. In the Spartans' defense, the Marines failed to identify themselves. Anyway, this event was the one that convinced Dr. Halsey and Chief Mendez that John should be the squad leader for the Spartans. Mendez's testimony deviates from the version told in The Fall of Reach, however, with Mendez saying that all John had to say in defense of his actions was,
"Not following protocol worked."
This response, though, just feels really out of character for John, especially at this time. I think the original response from the book would have been much more powerful. When the Spartans were left in the wilderness of Reach, they were told that the last person to board the Pelican would have to walk back to base. John made sure he was the last to board, then contacted Deja, the dumb AI that oversaw the junior Spartans, and got help flying the Pelican back to base. When confronted by Halsey and Mendez, John apologized and accepted full responsibility for his actions. That story, I think, would have been much better and more exemplary of who the Chief is. Coming to Episode 5, we get our final testimony from the UNSC archives, one that stands out from the others. While the testimony is set during the familiar events of Halo 3, the testimony comes from the court-martial of a Private First Class Colin McGinnis. On trial for assaulting an officer, McGinnis dives into the story of what led to that assault, during which he admits to trying to desert his post, and what brought him back to the battlefield, an encounter with the Master Chief, of course. On November 17, 2552, Private McGinnis was trying to figure out a way to get medicaled out of service when the Flood arrived on Earth. After seeing the Flood infect his squad, the private grabbed a nearby Warthog and just started driving. Along the way, however, McGinnis runs into the Master Chief, who says he needs a ride. And you don't say no to the Master Chief. Initially believing the Chief hadn't noticed he was a deserter, John finally opens his mouth as they approach the battlefield, saying,
"Mistakes happen, but they don't have to stay mistakes. Not while you have a chance to make things right."
The pair then jump into battle and the Marine finds himself reinvigorated, ready to serve once more. After the battle, the Chief orders McGinnis to hook up with the main force while the Spartan continues his fight. McGinnis eventually makes his way to a command post where he encounters an annoying officer who kept dehumanizing the Chief. Unable to hold himself back, McGinnis punches the officer, leading to his court-martial. And that basically does it for the UNSC archives our unknown lieutenant pulls up, but it isn't the end of the story. Who is this mysterious lieutenant? Why does she do this job? And will she make her delivery before her memory resets? For those answers, we'll need to rewind just a bit. To recap, at the start of the series, our unknown lieutenant is introduced as someone who cannot retain memories for more than 7 hours at a time, but can retain insane amounts of information in that time frame. Accompanied by a dumb AI named Oliver, the lieutenant was given a massive encryption key to bring to Spartan 117 the Master Chief, prompting the series of audio testimonials we just went over. Now, one thing listeners may have picked up on early on is that the lieutenant lets Oliver pick the testimony that's pulled up. She'll pick a topic, but Oliver selects the actual audio log, often leading to logs having some sort of connection with the current events in the show, and sometimes in a more layered way than fans initially suspect. After listening to the first archive testimony, the one from Faith Avdi, The lieutenant begins asking about her own past, only to find that it's completely classified. She's effectively a ghost. This worries her for a moment, but remembering how the chief brought out something amazing in Faith, she begins hoping that meeting the chief might bring out something in her. Before the lieutenant can think much more, however, she has to deal with a buildup of ice on the ship. While she does, she asks to hear about someone who served alongside the Master Chief, bringing up the testimony from Fohammer. This gets the lieutenant in a good mood while she chips away at the ice and motivates her to finish. She only finds out about Fohammer's fate as she finishes. That said, the log serves its purpose. The ice buildup was the result of an antifreeze leak, a leak that could make their ship easier to detect, and a Phaeton squad was soon in pursuit. To ditch the squad, the lieutenant decides to, quote, channel her inner Fohammer, trying to trick the Phaetons into thinking her ship is just a piece of space junk falling into a nearby gas giant. In truth, she would be in a controlled descent with the ship's systems shut down. The plan seems to work, and the lieutenant only barely escapes the gas giant's gravity well. With the Phaetons successfully dodged and her ship on course again, the lieutenant goes quiet for about an hour, her mind wandering to images of flowing streams, a big moon in the sky, wind in the trees. Genuine memories of hers. Keep this in mind for later. She snapped out of her trance, at which point Oliver notes that the UNSC archives are ready. The fact that Oliver is the one to mention them is another fact to hold on to for later. The lieutenant asks for a record from someone who served alongside the chief and survived, which gets us the Chips Dubbo clip. Chips mentions the chief's true origins, prompting the lieutenant to search deeper into the archives. While much of the material concerning the chief's early years is classified, Oliver is able to find a testimony from Senior Chief Petty Officer Franklin Mendez. After Mendez's testimony, as the lieutenant tries to ask more questions, she keeps getting told that what she wants to access is classified. Fed up, she starts asking questions about her own past, only to discover that much of that information is also classified. The lieutenant is able to get Oliver to open up just a bit, claiming that his continued refusal would put stress on her, something the AI is programmed to avoid, allowing Oliver to confirm that the lieutenant has completed 52 missions. At the start of the series, she was told that this would be her 5th and final mission. As she starts to freak out, understandably, she decides to turn around and abandon the mission entirely. 30 minutes into her decision, she asks Oliver why he hasn't tried to change her mind, only for the AI to claim that it believed that trying to change the lieutenant's mind would be a waste of time. Eventually, the lieutenant wishes she could get to whomever assigned her to this posting, only to discover that she had volunteered. She asks Oliver to explain, but the AI says that he has no knowledge of why she volunteered. And then he suddenly suggests that she may have been running from something. At this point, it should click that Oliver has been, in true Oni fashion, manipulating the lieutenant. Since he's a dumb AI, it's unlikely he's capable of doing so out of compassion, but even dumb AI have done some surprising things in the lore. Regardless of his motives, however, the lieutenant soon wonders out loud if there are any mentions of the chief and court-martials in the UNSC archives, which brings up the account of Private McGinnis. Taking to heart the chief's words as related by the private, the lieutenant decides to turn back around, only to discover that she might be out of time, and that continuing the mission would have a high probability of death now. Suddenly, however, they detect a ping. The Master Chief had alerted all ships in the area, enemies included, to his location. With enemy vessels no longer a concern, the lieutenant makes for the rendezvous point. Knowing she might not make it, she tries to impart the intelligence over to Oliver, but an alarm goes off and Oliver notes that giving him the intel or even trying to would violate the Cole Protocol, deleting Oliver and destroying the ship. Going on a quick tangent, this basically confirms beyond any doubt that the Cole Protocol has been updated for the created crisis, helping to make sense of why the protocol appears on Spartan HUDs when they wander outside of a playspace. Especially with them carrying AI, even their personal AIs in multiplayer, taking that outside certain confines might in fact be a Cole Protocol violation. Anyway though, back to the audio drama, episode 5 ends with the Master Chief boarding the lieutenant's ship, only for her to ask who he is. The lieutenant didn't make it in time. Her memory had reset. But there's still one more episode, and boy is it a doozy. As it turns out, the chief had been tracking the lieutenant's ship this whole time, testing out his armor's systems. He also knew, like with Private McGinnis, that the lieutenant was abandoning the mission and gave her the same opportunity he gave the private years before.
They don't have to stay mistakes.
The final episode is a very different beast from what came before. Most of its runtime dedicated to the lieutenant and chief fighting off Phaeton squads and boarding Promethean soldiers. Thanks in part to a high-G maneuver by the lieutenant, they're able to destroy the last of their pursuers before she passes out. Upon waking, she says,
The upper canyon streams on Eridanus too.
Go on.
I don't know why I said that. I think I imagined something.
Or remembered.
The tide flows in reverse during the solstice.
As it turns out, the lieutenant had been stabbing the intel into the ice subconsciously using knock code, a type of communication using a series of dots, or knocks, often utilized by prisoners of war. Further, the lieutenant's words indicated that the message had been flipped, allowing both the chief and the lieutenant to complete their missions. As the chief says goodbye, he reveals the lieutenant's name, Parisa. God damn, what a reveal, and what a perfect way to bring this character back. For those who might not be aware, Lieutenant Parisa first appeared in the short story Palace Hotel from Halo Evolutions. Written by Robert McLeese, the man said to be the keeper of the Halo story Bible during the Bungie days, Palace Hotel retells part of the level Metropolis from Halo 2, though with some notable differences. In particular, the Chief runs into Lieutenant Parisa, a childhood friend from his homeworld of Eridanus 2. He had even promised to marry her when they were both 6. When John was abducted for the Spartan 2 program, he was replaced with a rapidly grown Flash clone that would die in the weeks to follow. Despite believing her friend to be dead, Parisa carried around the old photo of her friend, intent on holding him to his promise should they ever meet again. While it's clear that John hasn't revealed his identity to Parisa, he definitely still cares for her. And as he departs, Parisa whispers a goodbye to John, by name. This is up to interpretation, but I'd like to think a part of her had figured out the Chief's true identity. As the series wraps up, Parisa and Oliver receive a message from an Oni agent known only as Codename Fixer with a new mission. Naturally, Parisa accepts. As she and Oliver depart for their next mission, the AI notes that her name has turned up additional entries in the UNSC archives, entries Parisa has Oliver queue up. When Hunt the Truth premiered back in 2015, lore fans were hoping and waiting for Parisa to make an appearance. She'd be the perfect candidate for a series diving into the backstory of the Chief. While Hunt the Truth was a great series in the end, the lack of a Parisa mention or cameo was disappointing. But damn, it seems like 343 heard our prayers and, following in the footsteps of Foehammer herself, they delivered. The last thing I expected before Infinite dropped was another audio series, let alone one that would follow up on a character I've been dying to see again for years. Her journey is so fun to listen to and rewarding upon a second listen. Knowing the Lieutenant's identity and backstory, revisiting the logs that are pulled up becomes much more interesting. The very first archive expands on the Scarab fight from the level Metropolis, the same level that the short story Palace Hotel is set during, the same short story where Parisa first appeared. A part of me wonders if Oliver knew the Lieutenant's identity all along and, as she herself suggests, was giving her clues within the confines of his programming. If he was also manipulating her at the same time to complete the mission, with each testimonial being exactly what she needed to hear in that given moment. And hell, who's to say that they haven't gone through all this before? Parisa notes that a number of actions feel familiar, and Oliver even makes comparisons to previous missions, such as when he says,
Lieutenant, you do ask, but not this early. Recommending a hold on your inquiry.
Why?
For the success of the mission.
The series, though, leaves a lot of unanswered questions, notably about how and when Parisa received her head injury. Did it happen during the Battle of Earth and Oni only recruited Parisa years later, or was her injury closer to the start of her service with Oni? Those are questions for another day, though. Before we wrap up, I absolutely need to mention Codename Fixer. First mentioned in one of the shorts included with Halo Nightfall, Fixer has since made minor appearances in other media, notably the Oni Archive series that accompanied the release of MCC on PC. There's little more to say about him, but he seems to pop up a lot in the background, even making an appearance of sorts in Halo Infinite's audio logs. In summation, Halo Infinite Memory Agent was a great way to cap off the marketing for Halo Infinite. I am curious about whether the plan was always to release these all at once, or if 343 had planned a more Hunt the Truth style approach, with new episodes releasing once a week or something. But whatever the original plan was, I'm very happy with this series. It followed up on a character I've wanted to see for years and did so in a way that makes repeat listens all the more rewarding. This isn't a review and I didn't set out to rate this when I first started typing away at my keyboard, but I will give this series a high recommendation. The character writing and acting are solid all around, great in some cases too. Parisa and Oliver are great together, their banter feeling natural and authentic, and the reveal of Paris's identity brought a genuine tear to my eye. And don't even get me started on the appearance of the Flood Hunter himself. This series was a ton of fan service, but damn was it done well. If you haven't already, give Halo Infinite Memory Agent a listen right now. It's free on Spotify, so you really have no excuses. For those who have listened, what did you think of the series? Did you enjoy it? Was it as fun for you as it was for me? Let me know in those comments below. Stick around for that Patreon shoutout, and until next time, this has been Halo Canon. First, I'd like to give a big thank you to our Horospis patrons. First, there's Hope, then we have Freight, Discombobulated Sycophant, Man in the Dark, Keisha Dila, Daddy Anarchy, Great Scott Productions, Jumpy Sucks Balls, Lone Ronin 117, Austin Cantrell, and Ever Corrado. Thank you all for your amazing support of the channel. Next, I'd like to thank our theoretical patrons. If you'd like to see your name here or get a direct shoutout, check out patreon.com/halocanon. You can simply support the channel or get additional benefits, such as behind-the-scenes materials, including raw audio for upcoming videos, or even shoutouts like this. All patrons now get early access to certain videos as well, and your Patreon title will appear in the Halo Canon Discord. However, your continued viewership is more than enough for me. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and maybe even subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. If you really enjoy my stuff, turn on that notification bell so you can be among the first to see new videos when they release. But for all my fellow Canonites, keep on being awesome.